A self-described global citizen, Dr. Akpan Obong has traveled to 15 countries on 5 continents. She believes that travel is perhaps the best educational tool ever invented. Again, this afternoon, can we put our hands together as we receive our speaker for the presentation?
Thank you so much. Hello. Okay, all right. So you young people, you know, when you've made like a really, really great point, so your friends will say, yeah, drop the mic. So I just drop the mic right there. And thank you so much, Madam Moderator, and for that wonderful citation. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm a friend of Covenant University, and I keep coming back so often that some of you are asking, what department, what are you in again? And so first of all, I just want to stand on existing protocol and just get on with the business. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about, well, this is a theme of the conference, Advancing Women in Academia and Industry Strategies, Policies, and Emerging Issues in the 21st Century. I was asked to talk specifically about funding, but I'm going to just kind of do a general overview first before we get to funding. And so one of my colleagues here, the gentleman at the back, talked about this women thing, why women? Well, he didn't ask that question, why women? He said in the past we had feminism, and feminism was considered to be all about women's rights. When he was talking, I wanted to kind of say, excuse me, sir, yes, feminism was about women's rights, but feminism was essentially a political and theoretical strategy for inclusion of women and men in all areas of society. So it wasn't just about women's rights as connotating the fact that it's only women who have rights. In the US, some of you are following some of the politics there. There's this movement called Black Lives Matter. And the counter movement is All Lives Matter. So those who advocate the All Lives Matter movement say, well, it's not just about black lives, it's all about all lives. And then there's a sub-movement of the All Lives Matter, that it's Blue Lives Matter. In other words, when there are conflicts between cops and people, especially black people, that it's not just about defending the black victims, but it's also about defending the police men and women who work so hard, we are told, to protect us and to keep us safe. But then, when you talk about all lives matter, even as all lives matter, we kind of overlook the specific problems that black people have. And so when it comes to feminism, when we say, well, it's all about human rights, in fact, there was an era when feminism was supposed to be women's rights and human rights, which is true. But in focusing on the broad idea of human rights, we ignore the specific constraints that gender imposes on women and men, for that matter, because it's not just women who have to live under the weight of gender expectations. So do men. So, for instance, men are expected to be this and to be that, to be this in, physically or financially or whatever. I spoke with a young woman recently. She's a young woman that I really like, and there's another young man that I really like. So I was trying to be mother, matchmaker, and all of that. So I asked her, have you thought of this person? How about you guys kind of talk to each other. And the first thing that came out of her mouth was, he doesn't have a house. He doesn't have this, he doesn't have that. So I asked her, how about what he has? He's a nice person, he's gentle, he's caring, he's respectful. He looks like the kind of person who will really support you. And so for her, it was like, no, ma'am, I can't get into a relationship with somebody who is not ambitious. I asked her, how do you know he's not ambitious? Because he doesn't have a house, he's still dependent on his family and all of that. I said, okay, how about you guys pull each other up? You work with each other and you're both in your 20s, so you still have the opportunity to build from scratch and move on. And so the point there is that, again, when we talk about feminism or gender rights, it's not just about how women are suffering under the burden of the societal expectations, but also men. And some of you young men here can agree with me that there are certain expectations of society on you. And so when we then move from feminism, as the gentleman said earlier, to gender rights, the assumption was that we would be talking about gender, rights for men and women. But I just want to take us back and say, yes, we are advocating for rights for men and women in society, not just in academia. But we also have to look at the specific problems or specific challenges. This is Canaan land. We don't talk about problems, we talk about challenges. The specific challenges that women have, and not just women in academia, but women everywhere, women in society, and not just in the Nigerian society, but universally. And so I'm going to start with why women, why are we talking about faculty women advancements? Why do we even have this workshop, this conference that is talking about advancing women? Why not all people? Okay, so then I'll look at some of the critical success factors. Again, I'm not looking at challenges or problems or constraints, I'm looking at success factors. And I'll go on to the part that I'm actually really supposed to be talking about, opportunities for women in academia, especially as concerns funding. And when we talk about women, it's not just women in academia, obviously. We're talking about women in politics. And one of my role models, the woman who spoke, she kind of was she was the respondent to the keynote address. So she talked about women in politics. And so when we look at the role of women or the critical factors of women in society, we look at women in academia, women in politics, women in industry, which the keynote speaker also talked about women in industry, women in the unpaid labor force. Do we know who those women are? Women in the unpaid labor force? Do we know who they are? Okay. Sorry? Yes. We call them housewives. We call them stay-at-home moms. We call them, if we are being generous, we call them homemakers. There's always the assumption that stay-at-home moms just stay at home, right? Housewives are just, in the house, wives in the house. And when I was growing up, my mom was what you would call housewife, homemaker, stay-at-home mom. But she was, to the best of my knowledge, she brought in more money. Well, maybe not more, as much money as my father did. But the work she did was not recognized because she was in the unpaid labor force. And for 1 year, I stayed home. And I knew how much work I did by staying home. I couldn't wait to get back into the labor force. And so we can also look at the critical success factors for women in the unpaid labor force. And then we come specifically to women in Nigeria. Again, I'm just talking broadly. You know, when we do research, you go from the global, the big picture, and then you bring down to the specifics. So women in Nigeria, the current statistics show that the literacy rate in Nigeria is 59.6%. And by literacy rate, we understand that to be the ability to read and write in any language, not necessarily whether you can speak English or not, right? Okay. So out of the number of Nigerians who can read and write in any language, only 11% are female. That looks like a really drastic number, doesn't it? Especially at Covenant University, where I understand there are more female students here than male students, right? And I've attended 2 free-year convocations, and a lot of the first-class students, graduates, are also female. So sitting here and talking about how 11% of the literate population in Nigeria are female. So what happens to the other 81%? So those are also things we can look at when we get to the point of talking about policy. And all right, okay, so it's already there. Okay, so in looking at some of the challenges that each of these groups of women encounters, we can also now say, okay, what are the critical factors and opportunities for women in academia? Because we are talking about women in academia, right? We can go back and talk about the other groups of women. And one that is dear to me is women in politics, mostly because I'm a political scientist, even though I do research in information technology. My core discipline is political science. Recently, I had an opportunity to be interviewed for TV here in, that was on Saturday, one of the TV networks here, and the question was about women in politics. And the anchor person asked me what can be done to include women in politics. And he talked about affirmative action and all of that. And I said to him that we should not be talking about including women in politics. We should be talking about how women can get involved in politics. See, one involves an action. One involves taking steps, right? As Mama said earlier. One involves rising, as the keynote speaker said earlier. The other one is passive. The inclusion is passive. All right? I hope I don't get into trouble by saying that. It's passive in the sense that there's an expectation that somebody is going to pull you and include you. That is not going to happen, because if you have power, no rational person wants to give up power. And so in Nigeria, with the politics being overwhelmingly male, I do not think the men are going to say, okay, now it's turn for women. So women have to go out there as a critical mass and take the power, not taking the power, but getting involved in the processes in the political process in the country. I told a TV person, I said, you know, the Bible says the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force, right? And by that force is not physical force, okay? Don't misunderstand me. It's not physical force. It's not physical violence. It's just to say it's time to rise. It's time to take steps. Like Mama said, if you want to get there, you need to get up. You need to rise. You need to take the steps to get there. So how do we get women involved in politics? All of us here, we have a lot of, maybe some of the young people are not up to 18, but if you're 18 years and above, you have a role to play in the Nigerian politics, especially as elections are coming up. The first role is to be a citizen and to make sure that you vote when the time comes, or do go through the process of getting the voter's registration card and be sure that you vote. That's the first point. The second point is supporting women who are running for politics. I have to say that the fact that a woman is in a political position does not necessarily mean that she will be gender sensitive or she will, you know, promulgate policies that work for women. It doesn't matter. It may not happen. We had Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister of Britain for 8 years, and social programs suffered drastically. Programs that affected women and children suffered drastically during her reign. The very same things that people were not talking about the male candidate. Eventually it was the male candidate who won with a lot of support from female voters. So we need, and the industry, that these all areas that we can look at the critical success factors to say, okay, what are the challenges and how do women in those spheres of life overcome those challenges? And and move forward. So instead of looking at those challenges as threats, as the keynote speaker said earlier, you turn the threat into opportunities and the stepping stones. So now, coming back to academia more specifically, there's a study that I found by Ismail and al., 2005, which identified some critical factors for women's success in academia. That study was focused on female professors in Malaysia, but the findings can apply to female academics everywhere. And some of the critical factors were family support and uniqueness of academic role. That second part, uniqueness of academic role, just speaks about what you bring to the table. Some of us study courses because, or we pick programs because either they are good or something that we like. Actually, we need to study programs that we really like, but not because they're good or easy. We also have, especially for the students here, we have to think long term. What's the market like 4 years, 5 years, 6 years from now? We begin to look at things from an entrepreneurial mindset. And Covenant University actually does does really well there. So you're not just going to pick a degree just because you've gone to university, or pick a research area just because it's easy or it's convenient, and then you finish and there's no market in terms of there's no value for it. Nobody wants to pay for something that doesn't have a whole lot of value. So that's a critical success factor there right now. Just your choice of what you study as a student, as a researcher. And then conducive culture. This is a really big one there because it comes with different things. And this was also the output of research by Westring and others published in 2013. Equal access, work-life balance, freedom from gender biases, and supportive leadership. Somebody asked a question earlier about a family. You know, you get a job, you're female, you have a baby, you take time off to take care of the baby and all of that. And how does that improve the chances for female academics? I'm going to give an example of just hopefully a brief example from my own experience as a female academic. I was a journalist for many years, and here in Nigeria and in Canada, but I wanted to do a PhD, and where I was, the university there didn't have a program in communication, which was the only PhD program I could do related to my field. So the next best thing was political science. Which I had. So I went on to do a PhD in political science. And I was no longer young at that point, because after putting a lifetime in one field, I'm starting in a second field. So by the time I got my PhD when I was 40. So that's also good news for anybody who is starting late in life. And not only that, I was pregnant as well. And I was 8.5 months pregnant when it was time for me to submit if I wanted to graduate that year. And I kept writing. I kept pushing. My doctor, my supervisor said, why don't you wait until after the baby was born? I said, I know me. After the baby was born, I would not be able to do it. And so I finished everything 18 days. She was late by a week. So that gave me 7 more days of resting before she was born. And 15 months later, I had another baby. And I was teaching a class in women's studies, a night class, when the labor process started. And it was a 3-hour night class. Eventually, I had him a few hours later, and yes, I stopped at that point, thank you. And then my students didn't know I had a baby, so the following week they had tests, and I showed up in class with the baby. So how did all of that happen? Because I had a good, supportive family, namely my husband. So when I had to leave a baby at one week old to go to class for 3 hours, he was there. And when I had to start teaching, when my baby was 8 weeks old and still nursing, and I had a long day, a 7-hour day, driving across town, he was there to help. And so together we managed. And when these kids started, were old enough to go to daycare, I worked in a place that allowed the children to come to the office. So after picking them up in daycare in the afternoon, I would take them back to my office. So my office at my university has a blanket, pillows, all kinds of things in my office. So all my children, including my oldest, who is now in her 30s, all my children have had an opportunity to sleep in my office, because when they would come and I was still working, they would sleep. Across the hallway from my office is the lunchroom, so there was food and all of that. So that really helped me to kind of get things done and be on track. So that's one that's really good. The family support will really help. And working in a place that understands the constraints that women as primary caregivers encounter. And then working in a place where people are not going to assess you based on being female, especially here in Nigeria, but it happens elsewhere too. You go to apply for a job, they look at you, especially if you're a woman in your 20s, childbearing age, 30s and all of that. Maybe you just got married and somebody's looking at you, 9 months from now, she wants to go on maternity leave. Or before then, it's like she wants to take time off to go prenatal, do this, or pick child from school and all of that. And again, a rational person, looking at this female and looking at the male, both fresh PhDs, both in their 20s, both this, maybe that the guy is actually getting married the following week and all of that. A rational male employer is going to hire the man, right? Because the employer knows that the young man will have a wife who is at home and the wife who can't get a job elsewhere because people are afraid that, or are concerned that very soon she'll be taking time off to take care of. So working in a place, and of course this also speaks to organizations, including Covenant University, to try to make the work environment be more family friendly, more child friendly, because we can't expect women to succeed when they remain the primary caregivers and when they are the ones who have to take time off to do things with children and all of that. And then 3 years, 4 years from then, it's like, well, how come you haven't published anything? How come you're not succeeding as this other guy who was hired the same day as you, but that guy doesn't have the same constraints? So this is why we talk about female advancements, because of some of these challenges that women constantly have. And the mentoring is a major factor, and the keynote speaker and then Professor Bayon talked a lot about the mentoring. So I'm just going to not say too much about it, except that issue about mixed gender mentoring. That is a young man wanting to be mentored by a man and vice versa. Just to echo what Professor Bayon said, there need to be clear boundaries, that this is a professional relationship and certain things cannot occur, cannot be done. But then the problem, the challenge there is that in many cases, as human beings, things happen. While a young man will not think twice about approaching a successful professor to ask him to mentor her, because he knows that the boundaries will be respected. In fact, with them, there probably will not be need for boundaries. But a girl or a young woman cannot do that. So what does that do? That perpetuates that gap between the success of female academics and male academics. There's this thing called the old boys network. A lot of women do not have the old girls network, except for conferences like this and for the female faculty women advanced that Covenant University does. My university also has a strong faculty women association. And so, but even within all of those organizations, the emphasis needs to be on mentorship, on saying, I'm the president of the Faculty Women Association of Arizona State University, for instance. Therefore, it's my job to make sure that all female academics, all female graduate students are supported in whatever ways they want to be supported. So we really need women leaders in academia, women administrators, managers, and senior colleagues to support the younger women. And let's start creating our own old girls network until we get to a point where we can enter the old boys network without any concern about our own, about boundaries. All right? You know what I'm talking about. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. There's also the personal factor. So all of this, I'm talking about the environmental factors. What happens, what needs to happen out there to help women succeed. But there's also the personal factor. We women, we have to have the drive, the hunger to succeed. And to echo some of the things that have already been said, we need to step out of our comfort zone. We need not, some of us, we take advantage of our femaleness to be lazy. Somebody said, oh, I was having cramps, that's why I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. Your mom had cramps and gave birth to you regardless. So again, I'm not minimizing physical challenges, right? But I have been in places where I keep saying, man, you make me look embarrassed as a woman. So we need to, as women, we need to stop giving excuses, as it were, not take advantage. Okay, I mean, I guess everybody here is at least 18 years old. We had a meeting at work a long time ago, and somebody didn't show, and so she was queried, and she said she had her period. So I said to her, but you didn't. She said, but I could have. So for her, it's like, so she said, oh, I had pain. I said, but you didn't. She said, because I knew. She said, but I could have. So that would have been an excuse. So something like that, and that was years ago when we were much younger. But even older women kind of take their femaleness as an excuse, or whatever happens as, and that, for me as a woman, doesn't help our situation. And so we should also aspire to management positions. Some of us, like me, I keep telling myself I can never be the dean or the head of departments. I'm just content to do my own research, do my teaching. But that's not a success. That's not how to succeed. So we need to, especially the senior faculty members here, to aspire to management positions. And we have our model here, Professor Bayan, who is like, I keep saying, when I grow up, I want to be like her. I said that I think I've grown up. But so we need to be there, because when we are there, we are a little bit more sympathetic, I think. It doesn't always happen. But beyond the empathy and sympathy aspect of it, when women look up and see women in management positions, they too will get inspired to want to get there too, right? You don't want to go to a place where nobody looks like you. And some of us, my sister, my newly found sister here would agree with me. And where we are, you walk into a place, in my department, in my entire department, I'm the only woman of color. I'm the only black person there. And so we have, like this weekend, we are going to go drive 2 hours to another part of the state for our workshop, our teaching workshop that they have at the beginning of every school year. So I'm going to be the only one there, and maybe, eating Nigerian food or whatever. No, I wouldn't eat. But so when it comes to gender, I want to look up and see, like the Senate here. I was here for a year as a Fulbright scholar, and I was privileged to be a member of the Senate. I wanted to go there and look around and see a lot of female faces there. And I kept fighting. I said, this place is too male. But to the glory of God, that has changed. So there are now a lot more female members of the Senate here at CU. So that's a good thing. So I guess women are advancing for real. Okay, so now this other thing, yes, Professor George, I'm getting there, the funding aspect. And so I'm going to stay here for a bit. We need to do, again, research that has value. I try to do work with people from all over the place, collaborate on research and whatever, and sometimes it's not a very satisfying experience because some people think the idea of research is to go to Wikipedia and copy things and put together and then pay a journal out there to get published. And then they list that as their publications. That's not the kind of research that has value. Value in two ways. Value in the sense that you are advancing knowledge in the field. And also, if you take that research to go to a place outside your comfort zone, it will have value. Secondly, value in the sense that it actually changes things in society, or at least changes the way people think about things in society. And on that note, if you have to pay to be published, then you shouldn't be publishing in that journal. So that's something I really need to emphasize, especially for graduate students here and my junior scholars. Junior in terms of you're just starting out as an academic. If a journal wants you to pay money to be published, don't bother. It's not a journal that values what you bring to the table. Will be begging you to get published. All right, so I'll just leave that there. And then, of course, writing. So that's part of it, the writing and the research. Okay? The other part, grants, funding. I know many people would say, well, they do the wiki, what I call the wiki research, because there's no money to go out to the field to do actual research. So my response to that always is, there are certain things you can do without money. You can create something, design a research around where you are, but that still has value. So it's not always that you're going to have research grants to do major funding, to do major research. It's a good thing to do major research, the big one that everybody's talking about all over the place. But there are times where you have to start small. Do what you can with the resources you have. You know why that is important? Because then when you go to apply for research grant, you already have a body of work in that field. So for instance, my area of research is application or integration of information technologies in society. Different parts, economy, culture, society, and right now in governance. All right? So if I now if I see a call for applications, a call for interest, and some agency wants to fund e-governance in Cameroon, for instance, I already have a body of work to let them know that this is something I can do, this is something I have done, this is something I have familiarity with, and this is something I can do. But if I don't do research in, let's say, African development, okay, maybe I do a bit, but maybe not. And then there's this major grant out there on African development, and apply. I'm just wasting my time because I'm not going to get it. Because by the time I get there, there's going to be a long line of people who have actually done work in that area. So what does that mean? Find an area that you like, an area of research that you like, one, that has value, two, and then start working on it. Start doing something. Even if it's just going to Winners Junction to start talking to people about whatever interests you. And then you find a journal that is, different levels of journals, the A journals, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. If you're just starting out, you don't want to really go to the tier 1. You start with the tier 3, the lower level of journals. That still gives you the value in terms of how your university assesses your performance. You start there and then build your way up. You can build on an existing research that you've done. So if you started out by going to Winners Junction to talk to people, the next time you go up to Ojo, right? The next time you keep expanding, right? And then, so now you have what it's called research agenda. And with that, it's possible to get funding. I'll send the links to Dr. George, some places. I receive an email every Sunday from an organization that lists tons and tons of research opportunities. Here's the good news for you. A lot of funding agencies will fund people in developing countries, not people like me, right? Because the assumption is that either I have the money or my university can support me. My university doesn't support grants, doesn't fund research. What it does, it will give you seed money to use to prepare your application for major grants. And so, but you are in a good position in the sense that you're here in Nigeria. And so I'll send a link to you. I was going to add it to here, but then it wasn't loading fast enough by the time I emailed this out. So you go through the different places and then see what works for your research. And then you also have to remember the requirements, because sometimes we make the mistake of applying for things that we are not eligible for. So for instance, I got something from one organization, so I was all excited because the area was the kind of area that a colleague works on. So I fired it off to him. I said, "Oh, this is in your field. You will love this and that and that." So 2 days later, I hadn't heard from you. I said, "You know, the deadline is approaching. Are you working on it?" So he wrote back and said, "It's for American citizens." I said, "Oops, sorry." You know, so you have to look at the requirements, the eligibility, and make sure that it's something that you have a chance. And it's not everything you apply for that you're going to get, obviously, right? But there's always a chance. I have, in the last a couple of years, I've applied for so many things. None of them has been funded yet. But then you get one big one, and that takes care of your research. This is another thing that I need to emphasize. Research funding is not just about money for your pocket. In many cases, like the last research grants I had, I even had to add my own money to finish the research. Because people make the mistake of thinking, "Oh, just get this," and then you have money to, you know, buy those new pairs of shoes that you've been, you know, eyeing, or do this and do that. And then before you know it, the money is gone and you haven't done the research. So that's something, I was trying to do work with a group of women. And so one of them, the lead person, said, okay, she wanted to talk to me first. I didn't know why that was necessary. Again, the technology makes it so easy to collaborate with people across borders. And so I sent an outline and lifelines. We use lifelines here, not deadlines. I sent an outline and lifelines. I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do the methodology and everything. This is what I need from your team and this and that. She insisted on talking to me first. So eventually we talked. And it turned out that she wanted money first, wanted grants first. She said, you know, how are we going to fund this? How do we? I said, ma'am, we are not going to get money for this. You've never done work in this area. I've never done work in this area. How about we get this out first? We can do whatever we need to do at this point. We can do without needing major funding. Let's use our resources. Let's do this research. That was March this year. I haven't heard back from her. So when you want to put the money first ahead of research, you're going to miss it. Like I said earlier, the reviewers of your application will be looking at what you have done before. If you haven't done anything before, don't even bother. So you start, I mean, of course, there are cases where you can still get money to start something that you've not done before. But no matter how wealthy that organization is or that individual, including Dangote, Dangote is not going to give you 10 kobo to do anything unless you can prove that you can do it. And what's the proof that you can do it? It's looking at what you've done already, okay? So, so those are, for me, the steps. First, make sure you're already doing the research. And then when you're applying, look at the requirements and your eligibility, and write your narrative. Narrative is basically the application. Write your narrative to speak directly to the call. So for instance, they want to fund research on sesefly in West Africa or something. That's just an example, right? So when you write your narrative, you're not going to talk about how you've always wanted to do research on mosquitoes, because mosquitoes are really, a major problem in West Africa, and et cetera, et cetera. That's true. Mosquitoes are a major problem. But that agency wants to fund research on sesefly, right? So you have to make sure, even though you can make the argument that because you've done research on mosquitoes in the past, they're all insects, you can do research on sesefly. But whatever it is, you have to provide a rationale. Don't just assume, just because there's this money and they're all insects, you can write about mosquitoes. You want money for mosquitoes. They look at it like mosquito, right? Okay. So what else do you need to know? Again, I have to emphasize the fact that you apply for money doesn't mean you're going to get it. Okay? But that doesn't stop you from applying. In my university, actually, they even make it, because I remember spending a semester applying for an NIH grant. NIH is the National Institutes for Health. They fund a lot of medical health-related projects. And I think I had a really good case, because the proposal was on using mobile phones to, doing this telemedicine thing, going to a camp a refugee camp in Calabar, and trying to track the health conditions of the women, mostly. Yes, the focus was on women, sorry. The health conditions of the women by giving them cell phones. This was a while ago, before everybody had cell phones. And doing that, so it wasn't funded because they said two things. The methodology was weak, that I didn't really say exactly how I was going to, and so for instance, prove that tracking the health conditions of these people had anything to do with the fact that they were using cell phones, right? Okay. And that was that. So the methodology was weak. And secondly, I was an assistant professor then. And so even though I had done work on information technology, but I hadn't done work on health. So one of my collaborators is somebody who does global public health. So I brought her on board. But she was a lecturer in my department, she was, so in terms of ranking, she was lower than I was. Then I brought another person who does work in Latin America, who also was a lecturer. So now I had my team and we went. Besides the methodology, the other problem that application had was that there was no senior faculty member on the team. I was just an assistant professor. And so those two things, the methodology was weak and there was and it was for $1.8 million. So that was a lot of money. They're not just going to give to an upstart just because you say you can do it. And even though I said I could do it, they weren't convinced that the way I described how to do it was really good. That's the methodology being weak, right? Okay. So now I went to another university and brought a full professor who was doing work in that area. And I was supposed to do the work. She said to me, yes, I can add my name, but I don't have time for that. And that was a period when I was also scrambling around to get tenure and promotion. And so that kind of collapsed. So I didn't persuade. But the point of this story, okay, 2 points there. Number one, you need a senior person on your team. Not just somebody who has done the work, but somebody who is senior to you. Or if you're senior, then that's fine. Then you need to bring younger people on your team to show that you are mentoring the younger generation or the younger faculty. And then secondly, my university actually allows us to put our research funding efforts on our CV. So they use that to evaluate us. Why do they do that? Because it takes a lot of time. it's hard work to apply for a grant. It's not just something you stay up middle of the night and write a one page and send out. For that NIH grant, which wasn't research that wasn't funded, my colleagues and I spent an entire semester just working on that, and with the accounting office and all of that. So my university has this supportive office. So if you are applying for a research grant, you've got a designated person to help with the budgeting. You've got somebody else to look through to see your methodology, your theory, and all of that. So we are not alone. I remember the budget person who worked with me, she would come to my office and spend all day just making sure that every decimal point was accurate, and then she had all the information in terms of what you can put into the system, what you cannot. So that also helps. I think Covenant University has something similar. If there is none, then there has to be a dedicated staff from the DFS, Directorate for Financial Services, whose job is to help faculty applying for grants to say, okay, this is how much a laptop costs. And then in some cases, they would actually say, by the time you're funded, the price would have gone up this. And then the university also takes a cut. My university, I think, takes about 62% of whatever grants you bring. They call it administrative cost, because when you're doing that, you're still getting your salary, you're still doing, even when you apply for, your budget includes a salary for yourself, for the investigator and your collaborators. The university is the one managing the money. The money doesn't come to us directly, and so they take 62%. And so the person who was working with me said, if you need $1 million for this project, let's better bump people up, because at the end of the day, you're not going to get enough when the university takes the 62%. And it's all, this is not magu or 419 or anything. It's all there. So that's also something to remember. I don't know what Covenant University does for research, external research grants, but if Covenant University takes a cut, as it should, because you're still their employee, then when you apply, you have to make sure that you've put enough cushion so that if you need 1 million naira for your project, that after Covenant University has taken its share, you still have your 1 million naira, because the worst thing that could happen to a research project is if you get the funding, but the money is not enough, because if you don't complete it, then that's a failure. And some agencies may actually want their money back. That's why the last research funding that I got, I underestimated how much I needed. So I ended up running short. So I had to put my money to finish it, because my integrity was at stake at that point. And so that's it. What else do you want to know? I can take questions, but we can have an entire workshop on grants funding, and then we can actually take actual call for interest, expression of interest, and we sit down and walk through each of them so Professor Bryan, next time invite me over, we'll do that as a workshop by itself. But in terms of just talking about the general aspect of it, I think that's all, unless you have specific questions. Thank you.
Can we put our hands together for our lead presenter? Very quickly, we'll harvest questions and comments. Read that presentation. Questions, comments, reactions to that presentation. Timmy. Yes, sir. Don't worry, let the student just pass it around. No. Yes, Professor Amos Salau. Can we have the mic, please?
Thank you, the Director of Ceremonies. I just wanted to make an input for gender balance And I've been listening with attention, especially the last presentation, and I'm interested in the role of the family in promoting education of our girls. Let me give you a true story. One day, a colleague, a female professor, told me he wants to tell me something. And I said, okay, fine, come. And lo and behold, she came with my son standing beside her with his hands at akimbo, looking at me. And the woman said, we understand you want to send your daughter to America for studies. No, that is wrong. It is this boy that should go. And I said, why? Because she said my daughter will soon change her name when she gets married. And I said, thank you, ma'am, but I don't discriminate between my children. So I had to voluntarily send this guy to USA. It was difficult, but we thank God. You see, she finished her master's degree. Where she was working for, they gave her not only green card, but citizenship. What I'm trying to say is that to what extent do we women promote the inferiority complex of our boys? In terms of, is it inferiority complex of that mindset we need to change? And it begins from the family. And to what extent do we promote the education of our children, of our female girls? Let me tell you a story. I never knew. I was just talking to a colleague. I said she had some children, and I said, is it a boy or a girl? And she said it's Abigail. It took me some time to understand what he was saying. The word Abigail means we all have another baby girl. So that Abigail shows that we have some preconceived ideas about female. And from my experience, most of the counseling I did was for men when their women keep having female children. And in fact, it's something we need to look into, maybe to do research into. To what extent is our culture and our values diminishing the education of our female children? So I was happy when she was talking about the role of the family. We have an important role to play in promoting education of our females. Not only in family, because the family makes the community, and from the community you have the nation. If we do not have the strong promotion at the family level, we might have some difficulty at the community and national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment, sir. We'll take more comments or questions. Yes, please, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Olabisi Yusuf. I want to comment on what our keynote speaker talked on including the faculty, senior faculty member in your research. You see, in this part of the world, especially in Nigeria, it is very difficult to get funding. I remember a time that we wrote a research on women in cross-border trade to UA. You know, the proposal was denied just because we didn't put the senior faculty member on we didn't include the name. So we had to look for somebody in the area of gender and then included our name. It was then that the proposal was approved. So what I'm trying to say is that as long as we still have the first set of professors in Nigeria on board, I'm not wishing them evil. It's so difficult for others coming behind to take a lead position. Thank you
very much,
yes.
Dr. Olabisi Yusuf from LASU. Other questions? Professor Chinoye Love Moses.
Okay, thank you. I want to appreciate the speaker for throwing more light on the issue of research, skill and grant. Actually, as if she was there in our last week training program. You have been able to make us understand that for you to win a grant is not just starting to, expect big money to come from abroad. You start from the gate, as you said. Go to your area of interest and look for a kind of activity happening over there in order to gain ground or capacity that will enable you to, increase or arise, as our speaker said.
Speaker, yeah.
And also I like the way you said it. There's a need for you to add to the list someone that has experience in that area of research. For instance, you are writing on health, as you said, and your area is ICT. There's a need to bring on board someone that has done work on health issues, in order to have that kind of value, add value to the work that will make the work to sell. I like that. God bless you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Other comments and questions before we go to the lead presenter for reactions? Yes. Mr. Adewale Babatunde from University of Lagos.
Thank you so much. The presenter said our university takes 62% from grants given. And I think that is on the high side. I want to find out, is it a global practice or is it peculiar to your university? And I want to take it down to Covenant University now. For their workers who are aspiring to have a doctoral degree and they have maybe grant, for the university, do they take part of that grant? I want to find out.
Thank you very much, sir. We have a question over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Samuel. You mentioned some categories: women in politics, women in academic, and women in the unpaid category. I would like to ask, how do you pull women out of that unpaid category? Because to me, or in Nigeria, it has become a mindset, or will I say a cultural or tribalist something, whereby mothers advise their daughters that, why do you want to go into the industry? Stay home, raise the children. Who will raise the children? Will your house help raise the children? So my question is, how do you pull women out of that mindset?
Thank you very much. Any other question from this side? Mrs. Moni Geshen? Okay, so would you like to respond to the questions?
Let me start with the last question. Thank you for asking that question. So my question back to you would be, why do we need to pull women out of that unpaid labor force? Well, I'll answer for you since you're out there. I'm the one with the mic. The answer is no, we don't need to, because what we need to do is to place value on what women do in the domestic sphere. Back to the example I gave, I was a stay-at-home mom for a year because my little boy, who is now not so little, didn't like daycare at all, and it was really stressful. So we made a decision for me to kind of leave a job that I wasn't too crazy about anyway. And so I stayed home and during the 1 year that I was home, well, that I didn't work outside the home, we saved a lot of money. Number one, the childcare that we were paying, the going back and forth, and of course my health, the stress of it, because in a household then there were 4 children, 1 in the university, 1 in the secondary school, and 2 babies daycare. And so my day basically started at 5:30 in the morning, and all of that, doing all of that so that I would be at work at 8:30. And then by the time I would come back, pick up the last one at the daycare at 6 o'clock, get home around 7, and then go through the evening, all of that. And the stress, and then so the 1 year I stayed at home, we saved money, I mean, actual money, and then emotional money, I think my marriage was probably the best during that 1 year, because that stress on me working outside the home and working in the home was taken off. There was still a lot of work at home. And so the point is that there are times when it's necessary for the family dynamics. For one person, it doesn't have to be remember, it doesn't have to be the woman. In many places, in Canada and the US, there are times when it's the man who makes the decision to be a stay-at-home dad. So that's also a new category now, stay-at-home dad, depending on the family dynamics. So that's one. Being in the unpaid labor force is not necessarily a bad thing, because the people there are providing valuable social services, raising children, keeping the home and all of that. And then on the other hand, we should put value to that work. Some years back in Australia, there's a woman, she does a lot of feminist research, Marilyn Wang. So she did this research in Australia to try to actually monetize the work that women do in the domestic sphere. And then she said so she kind of did this scenario where she added the money to the GDP of Australia and realized that if that happened, Australia would be considered the richest country in the world. And so the point she was making is that this work that women do in the home has value, and society needs to acknowledge that value. So I think your question is also underscored by the need to encourage women to go to school. That goes back to Professor's question, to go to school and to go into politics, to go into different places, which is good. I always say the very first feminist I ever knew was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. My mom was the only daughter, and then I came along, and he inspired me in so many ways. And then my father, I was the oldest, still the oldest child in a mostly male family. And when it came to time for me to go to school, my grandfather, my father's father, told him not to send me to school because, she's a woman, she'll go and get pregnant, and then, or if she doesn't get pregnant, she'll go and get married, and your name will be lost. And all of that, my father said, wow, they got into a fight over all of that. They said a lot of things to each other. But my father, who didn't have a whole lot of money, persevered, sent me to the best. I finished primary school, went to one of the best secondary schools at the time, back in what is now present Akwa Ibom State. And he continued to push, and he said to me, I will support you for as long as you want to go to school. And so not caring that, again, he comes from he had only one sister himself. He has more brothers than, I have more brothers than sisters. So he did that. And so, but then, sometimes it's we women who kind of are our worst enemies. And so we need to support each other, as I said earlier, in terms of mentoring and in the work environment, but also at home. All children have, all children matter, right? Okay, and boy or girl or whatever. And back to the name thing, that's why when I got married, I chose to hyphenate my name. Akpan is my first name, Obong is my husband's last name, just to let my father know that his name didn't disappear by sending me to school. It's not something I recommend to everybody. That's something I just chose to do to honor my father for making the sacrifice for me. And so I've talked about the first question, which was role of family in girl education. We need to support our daughters as much as we support our sons. If you have I've been blessed with having a parity in the family. I have 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. So I can't even make, so I support all of them equally as much as the Lord gives me the ability. So the other thing was just to affirm what I said earlier, including senior faculty and research grant application. And also emphasize another point that I made. If you're senior faculty, for instance, if you're a full professor, you don't really have another senior faculty. Well, you can have somebody who has done the work longer than you do, but research grant funding agencies will also look at how you're helping younger people. So if you're a full professor and you're applying for a research grant, it's a smart thing to bring younger lecturers, assistant professors, or graduate students, PhD students on board, just to show that you're also mentoring them. And so that goes a long way in helping. Then the last question, about the administrative charges that my university collects. Okay. What that money does, okay, first, is it global practice? Different universities have different ratios, but every university takes that administrative charge. What does that mean? When you apply for a major research grant, you're using university resources. For instance, in my case, I had a dedicated budget person from the provost office, whose job for that semester was to help me and other people who were applying for grants during that period. And so that's university resources. And then, of course, you're using a university property to do all of that. And during that period, in many cases, you are not teaching, you're released from university duties. So the university still has to hire somebody else to do the work. So that covers salaries, that covers equipment, that covers a whole lot of things. But you still have enough to do the research anyway, which is why you need a budget person to sit with you and show you how to drop the budget such that you still have enough to do the research. So that way, and then finally, CU. I think Professor Bayan can answer that question. I can't speak for Covenant University. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for the answers. Mal, would you like to respond? Okay, fantastic. Can we give our lead presenter another round of applause? As we prepare for the parallel session, we'll just take another round of pictures, and then we'll take the announcement and the vote of thanks. Matt, please. Can we have the director of ALDC and coordinator of Faculty Women Advance, our keynote speaker, Barrister Timi Prewolo, Dr. Janice Farah Samani, Dr. Tayo George, all members of Faculty Women Advance, Professor Amos Alao, and of course our conference participants from outside Covenant University. Postgraduate students, if you'd like to join in. Mrs. Joy Ochogu. Mrs. Rachel Coker from the Alumni Office. All conference participants. No, you don't want to join.